Rewind, retake. Okay. Hello. Welcome to the RSU5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, January 11th, 2023. Happy New Year to everyone. We are here at the Freeport High School Library. Susanna is not with us this evening, and hopefully Jill is on her way, but we will get started in the meantime with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do I have a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes of the December 14th, 2022 and December 19th, 2022 as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Maddie and Beth, thank you. All those in favor? Great, none opposed. Adjustments to the agenda?
No adjustments this evening.
All right. So we will move on to good news and recognition, and the only item for this evening under that is our report from our student rep, Tegan.
Okay, so an after-school homework center opened up in the library after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays for students who just need extra help or more time. Junior meetings are currently happening for juniors to meet with their guidance counselors and talk about college or what they want to do after high school and they get their GPA and stuff like that. Stricter rules are being put in place in the bathrooms at Freeport High School to try and stop the vaping and vandalizing issue. So no two students are allowed in the same stall at the same time now, and teachers are going in and out of the bathrooms throughout the day to check in. And last midterms are next week for high school students. I don't know about middle school, probably, right? So that is not exciting.
Which is why if you see Tegan leave, she's got our full support to go home and study for midterms. All right. Public comment. Not sure I see anyone for public comment. All right, we have another opportunity at the end of the agenda, but we will move on to item 8, report from the superintendent.
Good evening. Items for information this evening. First, we have a resignation. Victoria Cusino, Durham Community School classroom teacher. And we have some retirements effective at the end of the school year, unless otherwise noted. We're recognizing Meg Albright, Moore Street School second grade teacher. Lynn Meter, Pownell Elementary School special education teacher. And Deanna Coro, Mass Landing School kitchen manager, effective February 17th, 2023. We thank all those folks for their service to the children and families of RSU5, and we wish them the best in their retirement.
All right. So we will move on to administrator reports, and we will start with an update on the 22-23 district goals.
A lot of work has been done or started on the strategic goals, and we've organized them here for you in your packet. Item 9A, strategic goal number 1, that all RSU5 students experience a joyful learning climate that is safe, nurturing, and fosters curiosity. And the strategic objective 1.1 that was being worked on this year per our plan was to strengthen and align all social, emotional supports and systems to meet the needs of learners. The action strategy that's attached to that, the specific area to work on, that we were going to implement recommendations per details of the plan, and that was the middle school responsive classroom training. The indicators, the progress indicators so far are, first of all, our target completion date is June of this year. There is a responsive classroom training for middle school is slated for June 20th through 23rd of this year. And the other components of the strategy were documented and completed back in January. We're looking at that same objective. The action strategy 1.1F was to evaluate effectiveness of improved new practice and structures, and to also adjust as necessary. And if you look here by our schools, at Durham, there are increased opportunities for kids to build social problem-solving skills and develop a sense of value, of belonging, and reinstating after-school activities and connections across grade levels, such as Fun Fridays. There's continued proactive to address mean, unkind, or bullying behavior. There are educational opportunities for families to learn about challenges of early adolescence and ways to support their children at the middle school level. At Freeport Middle School, they're increasing their opportunities for using the rope course. Again, there's that continued proactive addressing of mean, unkind, and or bullying behavior. There, the middle school level advisory program continues to be built upon. And there are also those same educational opportunities for families to have some opportunities to learn about early adolescence and way to support their kids. At our high school, there's continued education regarding drug and alcohol use. They're doing it in a variety of ways: emails, pamphlets, posters, guest speakers, so forth. And as Principal Gulko reported out, they're working with the JED Foundation and what they will be doing with JED is to analyze their existing resources and support some mental health to develop suggestions and enhancements for improvements. They're continuing to implement strategies to proactively support kids with anxiety, such as their reset posters and anxiety posters in each classrooms and conversations they're having prior to assessments for students, which can be, cause anxiety. And there are some expanded availability of spaces to use during advisory, such as the library, open track, and gym. At Mass Landing, they're working to develop some strategies to support regular school attendance for at-risk students of risk for chronic absenteeism. And there are sustained opportunities for kids to build connections to peer and adults at the school community. Moore Street School is continuing to work on their Tier 1 responsive classroom practices, and there's some professional development on understanding on how to support behavior. They also have some targeted guidance lessons responsive to identified needs of students. In Pownell, they are implementing and refining their responsive classroom practices. They work to establish some school-wide expectations, and they now have some monthly student-centered all-school assemblies to celebrate achievements, share learning, and build community. There is also restructuring of response to intervention programming to support teachers, and they're working to build stronger relationships with students as they support them with classroom behavior plans using a variety of strategies. In instructional support, all the special education programs are being observed and assessed to determine strengths, opportunities, and next steps. And there's use of consistent positive behavior support plans for students with special needs. We heard earlier about the comprehensive threat assessment, the CSTAG, training to support the development of multidisciplinary teams to strengthen and maintain knowledge and skills in behavioral threat and suicide prevention, completed by the district team in the fall. And the budget requests that you will see will reflect the need for continued support for students for social emotional needs. I'll stop at that point. That is objective 1.1. Under that, if there are any, I don't know if anyone has any questions under that. I know it's a lot of information.
I just have a question regarding the high school with the expanded availability of spaces for students to use during advisory. I feel, was that also lunch? Where I feel like they were possibly going to be looking at other areas to eat lunch too. Do you know?
Jen is here. I'll ask her. She could best respond to that.
So we don't have additional locations for kids to eat lunch, other than if it's something that is specifically scheduled. So, for example, once a week, this fall, we were doing a mental health wellness group. It was self-selected kids who wanted to do that and had a guidance counselor who was there with them to eat for that group. Other than that, students are able to come to the library during lunch, but they don't eat at that time. So if they're eating, they have to be in the cafeteria.
And I just, actually, one question while you're up here, Jen. I noticed that those areas that were closed down for COVID, as far as the gathering areas that we have in the high school, that still seem to be like stacked up with furniture and stuff. Is there a plan to kind of open those back up again? Because just curious.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially the one that's right outside of the art rooms as you walk on by the guidance counselors. We're just super limited. We are packed on space in this building. So every classroom is used almost every portion of the day. And so we are working on clearing out some other stuff that has accumulated over time. And that's going to enable us to move those things because those are full of storage, those things that are closed. And so once we're able to move those, then we could reopen them.
Just thinking that those areas, I think the students really enjoyed, prior to COVID, and I know you had to close them off because of that, but it just seemed like that would be a good way to have alternative areas for kids to kind of just, hang out, or if they're doing something or having a snack or something. So,
Colin.
Hi, thanks, Jean. So a couple of points in this, at a couple points in this goal or objective, I guess we're under. The responsive classroom training is referenced, both in terms of the middle school responsive classroom training and then at Moore Street and then also at Pownell Elementary. I'm just curious if you could speak to how much those trainings are, I suppose meant to sort of supplementary to sort of training that has already existed and already in practice, and at what point it is filling a gap that has been identified. I'm asking because we are going to hear a little bit later when we talk about academic achievement, and I'm just curious how much those particular trainings are sort of targeted based on achievement, or how much they're just sort of part of a regular kind of rotating training that is done across the district.
At the individual schools, what you see, some of that is the work the team is doing, the individual school teams are doing. At the specifically at the middle school, they had not had that training. I'm looking at Cynthia because she's in charge of all that training, and they didn't have the opportunity to have that training. So that's why this is a full training. But some of the work that the individual schools are doing, for example, at Pownell, where it's mentioned, the teaching team, the staff team is working on in refining their practices for responsive classroom. Okay, I'll move on to objective 1.2. Again, that's under that still strategic goal 1, but that objective is to create multiple opportunities to ensure student voice is encouraged and strengthened at the classroom, school, and district level. The strategy 1.2E it says to continuously evaluate and adjust as needed. The indicators, the date for that, the completion date is targeted for May of this year. We have a few examples here at Durham. It was shared that student voice regarding school as evidence. I know Mr. Pidden shared some school letters that go to the school administration, and he's had some follow-up action there. That's a great example of student voice. Freeport High School, student leaders participate and or lead discussions about school culture, policy, and practices to support efforts to promote an inclusive school community, and their equity team and faculty work to define and clarify terms used as a school community in areas of focus in regard to DEI in order to support common language, identity, and goals. In Pownell, they have established a student advisory committee to increase student voice, and the civil rights team provided input and feedback for action steps for the school goal to increase awareness and to establish more practices that create a pathway for sustainable diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Student voice is certainly solicited by our school nutrition program, and there are student representatives on district diversity, equity, inclusion committee. They are able to provide feedback on all our agenda items. And those are some examples of what is happening there for that one.
Can I ask a quick question before we move on to the next objective? And I don't know, this might be inconsequential, but I'm just curious how we have an action strategy to continuously evaluate and adjust with a completion date in 3 months. Like, doesn't continuously evaluate mean over time?
It does indeed. And I think what's hard as we look at these, I think we're talking about the life of the current strategic plan, because some of these things are going to continue on, but at some point your strategic plan that you have right now needs to end, and then we do the process where we meet, we develop a new plan. So all of those, even some of the other ones you've had on some of your other goals, it will say continuously adjust, and it will say that's this completed more. It's more that the overall goal is completed.
Okay.
But that is a good point. But it's more the life. I think we think of the life of the plan.
Okay.
Because at some point you want to put this plan to bed and do the process where you get input about like where are we moving to now.
All right.
Because otherwise we'll never have it done.
You'll never be done, right? I guess I would just say that my thought is really to just raise the question around any of those is just to highlight, I think, the importance of continuing to make sure we look at that. I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily a specifically identified piece, like you said, in the next strategic plan, but just so that it's not something that sort of goes to the wayside where we'd be like, oh yeah, we asked for voice and now we're done asking for
Check
voice.
the box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So thanks. Maddie.
Because these are progress indicators and you said the word examples, I'm assuming that this is a continued focus in all 6 of our schools.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So far away. Sorry. Thank you, Jean. I was just wondering if we could get an update on student voice from Jen on the follow-on work from last year that the students had done, and if that's maybe included in here, or if there's
And
other
that
things.
is ongoing. That is being done right now. I know we were meeting actually as part of the DEI group. I don't want to speak for Jen, but our committee, she mentioned that some of the work the kids are doing now and getting ready to do some focus groups. So that is continuing. There's no data to share at this point, but that work is still going.
That's great to know. I'm so glad we're still doing that.
Strategic Objective 1.3, to maximize student opportunities for physical movement and adequate breaks to allow students to refresh and recharge for learning. The Action Strategy 1.3a, identify and assess the effectiveness of all opportunities for physical movement breaks at the classroom and school level. And all these these are targeted for completion in May 2023. That one has not been started, nor has Explore research effective practices in use in other schools with similar grade spans, and then identify areas of needs or improvement for break. Those have not been begun at this point. Strategic Objective 1.4.
Can I ask a quick question on
Sure.
that? So do we still think May 23 is a reasonable date, or is that going to get moved? I mean, that's a lot of work to do between now and May.
We're going to see what we can do with that. This was a very, I will say, ambitious goal to complete all of these this year, and we're going to really see what the capacity of the administrative team is to do this work and our staff.
Is this something that the Wellness Committee helps with, or is this purely an administration?
It's really work we have to do at the school level with these. Objective 1.4, strengthen diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Action Strategy 1.4e, evaluate the effectiveness of implementation from recommendation. Target completion is May of 2024. At Freeport Middle School, there's some professional development which focus on instruction for multilingual learners, and they also acquired a computer-based translation for content and communication. At the high school, staff members are using department time to learn about or reflect on inclusionary practices and to review the curriculum with a lens of equity. And their student equity team and faculty work together to define and clarify terms used as a school community and areas to focus in regard to DEI in order to support common language, identity, and goals. There's some professional development regarding grading practices with a lens of equity that's going on. And there is a focus on increasing equity of instruction for all students through differentiated strategies to enhance the curriculum. And professional development, which focus on instruction for our multilingual learners. Mass Landing hosted a day of welcome. Moore Street School staff participated in the first 6 weeks of school, including all learners workshop. Classroom teachers and special education teachers collaborated to plan for differentiated instruction for students with special needs. Our speech language pathologists support classroom teachers to use augmentative and alternative communication devices to support student communication. There's focus on unit planning and core content areas with a lens for differentiating instruction to meet the needs of diverse learners. And teachers and multilingual learners meet regularly with grade level teams to discuss strategies to support success in the classroom. Pownell Elementary School has an active civil rights team that established and sponsored a day of welcome. And there's a focus on awareness and inclusion of individuals with disabilities. The technology departments continues to ensure that all students have access for a device for learning. And instructional support department, Dr. Sellers share that the Communication Bill of Rights being distributed as a social justice imperative that all students, including students with disability or any extent or severity, have a basic right to affect through communication the conditions of their existence. And that Bill of Rights has been posted on the district website. The district social studies curriculum is being reviewed through the lens of equity, and student representatives on the DEI committee continue to provide input. And our new Bright Arrow notification system for parents is launched, and it includes a translation component. That is the end of what we're working on Strategic Goal 1, if there's any other questions regarding that.
Jill.
Do you have a timeline for the completion of the district social studies curriculum, and is that something that we'll get a report out on?
Cynthia, would you like to give the ETA for that work?
I can't give you an exact ETA. I can tell you we're working on it rigorously. We have, I think, 5 meetings this month alone with different. We worked at the committee level, and now we've gone to the pulling by grade level because they've got their units done. Now we're going through some tuning protocols and so forth. So it's a lot of work. It's intense work, and it can't be rushed. The intent, though, was to have a report out at the end. At the end of, I think it's in May. It's on one of our. It's on one of our on the work plan for the board. I think it's in May. So that was the intent. So if nothing else, you'll have an update by then. I think it's in May. I don't. You know how we set the schedule at the beginning? I think it's a May meeting.
Maddie.
That was my question as well. This is was it?
Enjoy the ocean music while we wait. Okay. So now I don't know if the mics are on.
No.
Hello? That's a little better. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Maddie.
So that was my question. I don't know if you can hear me or not. That was my question as well. And yeah, I hope we will have an update by May. We've been asking that question about the timeline for, I don't know, 3 years or so now. So it's been a while.
I was going to say, I feel like the actual work started this year, and we knew it was a multi-year process. I think
maybe I've been asking questions.
You've probably been asking about when it was going to
get.
get to the plate, and I think it actually got on the plate for work this year, and we've always been told it's a multi-year process. So
yes.
I know we're anxious to hear more.
We are. And I have another question. Where is it? Yeah, I would love to hear, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I would just love a sentence or two on what the professional development at the high school is regarding grading practices with a lens of equity. I'm just curious to know that. A sentence.
I'll
or
ask
two.
Jen to come up, and while she's coming up, I did check the work plan, and it's in May of this year. There'll be a report out. Cynthia was correct.
So we are working as a staff where we are talking about the topic of equitable grading practices and looking at practices across the school. We have worked extensively on aligning our curriculum, so common assessments, our year-long plans, and have now been looking at how any variances of grading practices impact the sense of equity and the experience for students. And so we've been reading a text that's called all the leadership teams we have 3 adult faculty leader teams at the school. And actually we have 4. 3 of the 4 are reading this text that's called Grading for Equity. And then, all of the entire faculty in our November PLD day explored portions of that text, and then the work has continued to narrow the focus. And so it was actually today that we were working on, we've narrowed it to talking specifically about habits of work. So how does habits of work vary from department to department, from grade level, the expectations you have for a freshman versus an expectations for seniors, and really just kind of getting to the heart of how we're grading, what that is composed of. And we're not looking for lockstep for people to do the same thing, but to have clear and consistent practices across the school. So that's not a simple task either. We've been using habits of work universally across the school for at least the last 6 years, might be 7 years. And so it's kind of coming back to people's systems and really being more clear about what that looks like, which could be common with the other schools in the district, but could also be very different. But also, we had conversations today about being clear about there's an umbrella and a goal for the whole district for habits of work and how we fit underneath that. So then we'll talk about grading assessments. We'll talk about things like midterms. All those pieces will come into it, but we're starting with habits of work so that there's a concrete product that comes out of it.
Thank you. I wanted to hear about it because I'm hearkening back to, 4 years ago when we were talking about grading at the high school. And, there was a lot of community engagement around that topic, and we changed course at the time. And this sounds like a really thoughtful continuation of that work. So I'm excited to hear about it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Kelly.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious to know whether there's an ongoing mechanism for diverse learners in our schools to provide feedback, either with regards to these specific indicators or in general, about their experiences regarding equity.
The students themselves?
The students themselves, yes.
I'm going to look at our principals. Do you have the question is, do you have mechanisms in place for diverse learners to provide feedback?
And I feel like if anyone's got a head that's going to attract static electricity, it would be me. I'm not sure I have a succinct answer, Kelly. It's because at least at DCS, the diversity and equity, the areas that we did that work last year in terms of identifying. We had student voice in terms of that, and then we do intend to cycle back to them as we come through the year. Some of the areas that they really identified, though, really around sort of diversity that our kids were seeing, especially our middle school learners, was things like access to sports or access to after late buses or access to equipment. Those were the sort of areas of focus they had, and the focus for our school was very much around access for all learners. So I think sometimes in this conversation we go between an expectation around what is the content we're teaching within social studies and how does that perhaps reflect diversity and equity and inclusion, and then some of the more specific goals that are occurring in the schools outside of that curriculum piece. So we have not got a survey set up for kids in terms of what are they seeing in terms of increased diversity in their classroom libraries, and how is that reflected? But that is work that we've done. So I don't think we have a specific strategy for getting kids input on some of those strategies. If that makes sense.
I would jump in addition, when you look at the instructional piece, and if we really know our learners and we're differentiating the instruction based on the student needs, that really gets at some of what you're asking for. But I think it's very definitely multi-layered for that, if that gets at what you're asking.
Yeah, I just wanted to just think about from their perspective, make sure that they do have a voice in this process and that the students themselves are the ones that are kind of the ones that are we are looking to know whether we're being effective or not.
Maura.
I'd be interested, I had a different question, but I'd be interested in hearing if Tegan, not to put you on the spot, but if you wanted to say anything about that question and student input.
I mean, I have never, I mean, some teachers ask you for input, but that is not up to, like, in my classes, it's not really up to the students, like, what we do or when we do it. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So more of a comment than a question, but I know the Freeport, and maybe I'm jumping a little bit ahead to the work that we do with the community in one of our other objectives, because I know one of our other objectives is to engage in the community and like use resources and do experiential learning, things like that. I think I sound like a robot. But I just wanted to mention the Freeport Historical Society is undertaking an Indigenous people's history like examination and group that's meeting, and I know Kara I think has been to one of the meetings, so that just might be a resource that the RSU might want to be aware of if you want to engage with them, or if maybe we already do.
Jill.
These are fun tonight. I have a question about habits of work, because so we've heard from the high school. Is habits of work something we're doing across all schools? And then my second question is, are the habits of work, is that something the teachers are assessing, or is there a student component of self-reflection in habits of work? And is that consistent K-12, or is that depending on the building?
Our curriculum director, can you respond to that?
You'd have to ask the individual, because they're probably not.
Mr. Grogan.
I think that it varies from teacher to teacher. Habits of work are graded. I know 6 through 12, but I believe K through 12, right? The younger grades as well. The same core kind of habits of work we're looking at with it. You know, when we talk about like the student voice that you talked in it, like we have the general, like this is what preparedness skills we're looking for. And then, you know, what we want the teachers to do is work and say, all right, in my 6th grade language arts class, this is what it looks like. This is what it means in a conversation with the kids when you're setting up your classroom in September. So they're part of that norms when it comes. Some teachers do self-assessments all the time. You know, some teachers do it, you know, inconsistently, and probably there are some classrooms that don't do enough of self-assessment, but all teachers do their own assessments as well. And it's that combination of, you know, all of that that's really how they're graded in habits of work. I was in a STEM class the other day where the kids were finishing their project and doing their self-assessment around their habits of work and their content before they handed it in.
So when you look at, and I believe you use Power School here?
Yes.
So when you look at like a student's grades, are the habits of work separated out from the assignments that are graded? And are they, because I know some schools will model and have like students do self-reflection and have a conversation with the teacher of that class. So I was just kind of trying to figure out how we do it in this district. And then are there any times when those habits of work affect other things other than the students' overall, you know, grade?
Yeah.
Like, does it ever impact like athletics or activities or anything like that?
So at both levels, at all levels, the kids get a habits of work grade and a content grade. So if you're in an English class, you're going to get your habits of work grade that's, you know, your preparedness, your engagement, your determination. And some of those might be just assignments that are only assessing habits of work. Some of those assignments might be assessing some content standards and some habits of work standards as well. But they, after they're marked and they're under that assignment, they go their separate ways. So when the kids pull up their report card in Power School, they'll see, 6th grade English, habits of work 3.5, content 3.25, like that. So it's graded, so they see it as two separate grades with it. For eligibility, what we use at the 6 through 8 level at both schools is the preparedness grade, that one strand of the habits of work. And at the high school, I believe, is it the whole habits of work? It's the entire habits of work that is the eligibility at the high school.
Because I guess for me, like, I think that's a great way for students, like, to kind of look at the whole student learner. But I do find that, when you think about it, someone who struggles in school, you're going to have some students that probably have some good habits of work but just can't get the grade. But often their habits of work, probably the grade reflects. So it's almost like they're getting, sometimes to me it seems like you're almost getting double penalized. So how do you work with those students that, especially as, they go through our K-12 system as they go on and, struggle academically? I just find that sometimes habits of work, it's like getting the information twice. Like you're not, you're doing these assignments, but then you're also being assessed because you're not doing them. Your habits are poor. So it's like, so for me, like, sometimes I feel like you're getting it twice. So, but am I misinterpreting that, or how do you work with
I think separating it, like, from an information perspective, it tells us a more complete story about it. Because if a child has low habits of work and low content, like you're telling us, we can look at, is it that they need help with the content and the habits of work, or is it really just the habits of work? And if they had done, the work along the way, they would learn the content, that ability. So, like, right now, is in our RTI process with a lot of kids, what we're looking at right now is trying to determine, is the kids need the executive functioning? Is the kids they need more time to do their work? They have the executive function, but they just don't have a mechanism and time to get that done, which we can help them with at school? Or do they need actual content, like how to do the math support, or how to do, increase their reading skills or increase their writing skills? And breaking that out by the different strands helps tell us that story. Because if we look at, when they do an assessment and they're sitting there in class, they're getting a 3, but their preparedness is a 1, that really tells us when they have the time, they can do it. But, something else is getting in the way, and it's a different level intervention. So it tells us a more complete picture and helps us on how we want to really target the intervention for them. As opposed to before, if we just saw C, on the paper, we don't know kind of what leads into that C. With that, this breaks it out for us. But for some kids, it is a double whammy. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, I thank you for that. I mean, I think, it's nice to hear that, like, from the younger grades. For me, like, I work in a high school, and sometimes it's hard to have conversations with students when they're getting credit and transcripts and talking about grades, and if habits of work are, when they're in there as a separate piece from the assignment grades. But it sounds like at the high school level, the Freeport High School does something a little different than that, or are those grades, like habit of work grades, plus the scores for what the kids are doing for assignments for a course?
I can let Tegan or Jen, but as a parent, I think I'm looking at I'm looking at a habits of work grade and a content grade. We'll see if I know as a parent.
It's a quiz. Our habits of work grades are never included with content grades, so they are reported separately on transcripts and in Power School, that students get feedback on both. They can be habits of work can be things that stand alone. So it could be something that's assessed over the course of 2 weeks. How engaged were you? How prepared were you? What was your work ethic in class? Or it can be tied to a specific assignment. So it could be, this was the summative essay that you had to do. What were your habits of work with that? Did you meet all the deadlines? Did you work with your group? Did you seek feedback? And so we feel like it's two different types of feedback that students get. We were talking about this today. You can be a total disaster with your organization and your time management and your collaboration, but really understand the content and skills of that lesson or class, or vice versa. That you can have everything organized and work well, but you really don't understand the content. And we feel like it's really important to separate out those two things. So Tegan could probably talk more about that.
Yeah, it's completely separate, except in some of my classes, like if you're doing all the homework and you're getting good habits of work for that, but then you do poor on a test, like I got a 76 on an 8-push test, it brought my habits of work down. And so sometimes that confuses me, like if they're separated or not, because for other classes it never does that. But then for certain classes, my teachers will be like, oh, it's power school, it's not up to us. Like if you get poorly on a test, then it brings your habits of work down as well.
We'll look into that. That should not be the case.
And I guess, so to come back full circle, like for habits of work, I mean, is that something as a district we'd want, like, all teachers to have the same approach to habits of work? Or are we okay with everybody having their own approach depending on the assignment and what's in the class? Because I'm all about having autonomy with your curriculum in the classroom, but I also think for students, we need to have some consistency too, because it's hard when the story's different for each class you have. So I guess when you're talking about these things, it sounds like you have these discussions, because it's complicated to try to bring everybody in and apply it, because you're teaching such different subject matter. But for me, like habits of work, I just feel like there's so many ways to approach it, and as long as we're being mindful, I just really am thankful that you explained this for me, because I find I struggle with how to approach that in a thoughtful way so that it's meaningful, because we want to have learners graduate from our schools with good habits, right? Because they're going to be good citizens if they can be at meetings on time. Like, obviously I missed that one. But with those kinds of things. So thank you for sharing more information about habits of work.
And I can just say that one of the things that we worked on since the beginning of kind of the inception of Habits of Work is that we do have a rubric from pre-K to 12 that is very, very similar. There's some things that branch off at the high school, but even when we did that was conversations between Will and Ray and I about what that was going to look like and what the transition would be. So there is that commonality of preparedness, engagement, and work ethic are the pieces that we have at the high school, which the wording might be slightly different, but it's the same concept that they're based on this rubric with clear expectations for kids.
Maddie.
So I referenced this earlier when you were up here, Jen. I don't have a question for you, but it's interesting how this comes around, because when I was pretty new on the board, this was the work we were engaged in, like, pretty full time, and we had a committee. I forget the name of the committee, but I sat on that. Beth, you joined it when you were first here, and then quickly we realized that work was pretty complete, and we had. So I have a comfort level that obviously our newer members don't have, because they weren't around for that work. But it's also reminding me that I don't think we've had many opportunities to visit our schools this year, and that's also why I have a greater comfort level, partly because we engaged in that work significantly in these meetings. That committee was engaged in that work, but also I got a chance to see that when I visited the schools. So I have a large comfort level, especially at the elementary or middle school and below. I have a large comfort level that students have a voice and give feedback. They're engaged in their learning with their teachers. Maybe not every teacher exactly the same, but I really believe that that's happening, that teachers and students are interacting, and students have voice to say how they think they're doing. I think they're self-assessing, maybe not always on paper, but as they're engaged in the learning process. And I have a huge comfort level. I think we've come a huge long way in terms of habits of work practices across the district. So I don't know if that helps any of our newer members, but my comfort level is large. But I would like to ask Jean and the administrators to consider opportunities to invite us into the classroom a little bit more so that we all can sort of be on the same page about that.
Yeah, and I think Jill's point's a good one and was well timed, and I'm sure intentionally well timed into this part of the discussion around equity and the question around equity and the grading practices, because, you know, where it's the more sort of philosophical the question is around like habits of work and what does preparedness look like and what does determination look like and those sort of things, the more people could vary based on their own perceptions, right? So I guess I would encourage, as they're looking at equity or looking at grading through the equity lens, to make sure that habits of work is included in that review, right? So that, they'll vary class to class, teacher to teacher, but they shouldn't be stark differences. If I have this teacher for this class and you have that teacher for the same class, what the grades look like for habits of work and content, frankly, should be relatively similar, right? There's some autonomy, but there should be consistency. And I don't know if they actually look at that and say, okay, we have 3 teachers that are all teaching the same course. Are we seeing similar results coming out of those 3 classes, right? Because that would be my first trigger to say, is there equity in the grading practices across, the same content with probably a relatively similar cross-section of kids. So I'm glad to see that work is happening, but I would encourage to make sure that the habits of work piece is included in that review. So, sorry, we got stuck in one of your indicators.
That's okay. That's all right. And I have made a note to look at some visitations, school visitations to the board. I did take that down. We'll move on to our strategic goal number 2. All RSU5 students regularly engage in meaningful student-centered learning. We're working on objective 2.2, expand curricular and extracurricular choices that respond to students' interests and needs. The strategy that's being worked on is 2.2b, to survey staff and students to identify the area of interest as the system considers additional courses, mini courses, activities, clubs, and extracurricular choices. Progress indicators. To date, the target is May 2023. I think this is another one for sure that we may say the target is May 2023, but we're not going to say we're never going to have a new curricular, extracurricular offering because we checked the box. Golf participation has expanded to warrant a JV golf team, and you're going to hear some conversations when we talk about budget. Also, our baseball participation is up and to warrant first team baseball, which is interesting. This report went out, so we had it mailed out on Tuesday, but we've had a discussion since then. That may not be the case, but it was when the report was put together. And that's where we are with that so far. 2.2c, explore and evaluate possible new options for additional program components. That's not started yet. Again, the targeted date was May 2023. Again, that one might have to be bumped. For 2.4, ensure that student growth is measured.
We got a question before you move on.
Sorry, I bumped ahead. We're back to 2.2.
Hi, sorry. I was just curious. I know Craig obviously is in charge of evaluating the sports and things. Does he do all of this sort of extracurricular?
He would be athletics.
Okay,
he would be
does
athletics.
The other evaluation of all of that to decide?
That would be more at the building level if there are extra things that they might want to offer, or if they're for opportunities. But Craig would be just athletics.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
And can I ask what 22C means? So new options for additional program components. What does that mean?
I would say that this was the plan of the board's plan, that it might be, are there additional within the programming components within a program? So it could be components within the extracurriculars. To expand, to look at a program we have, and are there other do we want it with a program an existing program we have?
Yeah.
Are there other pieces that we want to add to it to broaden it?
Okay. So like we do mad science at one school, like, do we want to grow it to the other school, something like that?
Or do we want to have, even though there are additional, I think Matt Science said there are additional modules that we might want to do based on student interests.
It's wonderful that we're adding, JV teams for sports and to have that. So I know that we really try to make it available for everybody that wants to play to play. So that kind of brings me to Maddie's championing of the performing arts side of things. And, I just want to make sure that that is included in this survey of looking at things, because I know there's a lot of kids that are involved in the performing arts and want to do theater. And, theater is that kind of thing where you get cut if you don't get a part, and then you don't get to do theater because there's no JV team for theater. So I really think that we need to make sure that we're including the performing arts in this and not just talking about the sports.
I have to admit, I think I may have been not paying attention when we were supposed to be submitting all this information. If I can just add to this one a little bit. So, with that in mind, Beth, so we have, in this area, we had just one play and drama club, and we didn't cut, we just had lots of munchkins or lots of trees. And so we now have, they were spectacular performances, but we're, right, Michelle, you know. So, so we'd added to that. So we actually now have 2 drama clubs in order to have a middle school one and an intermediate grade one. We added yoga club. We've added ropes course club. We've added the civil rights team. So over these last couple of years, as you know, when we've come to you for like stipends at the budget, we have been adding those things at the school level, also sort of in response to sort of student interests or things that seem apt at the time, or when the demand is there. So.
And can I just add one point to it that I'm glad Will shared that, is that, remember, this is just a snapshot in time, because if there were things that some of these objectives you've been working on for many years and lots of data has been reported out. This is just more the current data that we have based on the principals' reports that they shared, or there were a couple indicators we asked for their feedback on. So you have a wealth of other things that have happened as well. So I wouldn't want us to think that that's the only thing that has happened over the course of the life of this plan.
Are you good, Maddie?
Well, I mean, my name was mentioned, so I want to jump in, and my time on this board is drawing down. So I just wanted to. I know that there are other things happening, but we have a lot of new members on our board and a new superintendent and some new admins, and I'm glad that Beth brought that up, because we have come such a long way in the arts. Not just the performing arts, but the visual arts as well. And we're a really strong district at all our schools. And I'm so proud of the faculty that we've attracted and the way that they're all working together now. And I just hope that focus and that momentum will continue in the arts as well. I think, there are some districts across the state that are kind of known for the arts. And I feel like we're like just there, like we could give them a run for their money, and I want to see that happen. So no pressure, but let's keep focusing on that too, please.
Jill.
I just wanted to comment. I think sometimes, like, when you look at this in the progress indicators with just those 2 athletics, because there are some new people to the board. I thought last year I was so impressed every time the schools reported out with our social emotional learning and diversity, and those slides and those shows, like, of all the activities available at the schools. I wish there was a way to just say, remember that, because I did appreciate that. Like, that was impressive, just seeing the opportunities, and we're coming out of COVID, and that was such a thoughtful piece of those presentations. So I just want to make sure that I did see those.
Jen.
To add to Jill, I think being on the stipend committee, anyone who would want to see the stipends that we give for all the different clubs and activities, and non-athletic, this was all non-athletic. So I think that we do have a huge amount of non-athletic clubs and extracurricular. And again, I feel the same way as Jill. I wish she could be like, remember all of that stuff we talked about last year.
I just gonna say, it comes from someone who, I work in a district that stipends are tied to our contract language, so that you have to do something for 3 years before they'll consider a stipend. So that really squelches things. So the fact that we say, if you want to do it, we'll support you, it's a gift. So I don't take that lightly. And to see that number of clubs and things for not just athletes, because kids have a variety of interests. I think we really do a nice job with that, and I appreciate it.
I am curious about that, actually, because I know some clubs get started and they don't have a stipend. So is that, I don't know, is that something that typically happens, and see if the club's successful and then whether it turns into a permanent position?
And there are some clubs that they're not officially a stipend position club, but there are clubs that are running, and there's some monies for that. Folks are being paid for doing those clubs. It really depends. Does it fit the definition of a stipend?
Okay.
And we have those too.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. Okay, thank you.
It's just a good opportunity to remind folks of the work of the stipend committee. Like, it went through an intensive review that finished last year, and just to ensure that there was an equitable lens through which we were looking at that across the district. So that is yeah, it looks like we're doing like a look back tonight. Like, so that's also good work that's happened. Yeah.
Several years in review with the data I've looked at. Yeah.
We're never going to get to now unless we keep it moving.
Okay, let's go on to 2.4. Ensure that student growth is measured and communicated in meaningful ways in response to stakeholder feedback. The strategy is 2.4C, ensure comprehensive communication to stakeholders. And again, targeted completion date 2023. And again, it's never really done, but we're going to talk, this is the life of the plan, so that at some point we can create a new one. Standards are being assessed in the curriculum are updated as appropriate during the curriculum review process. There's a program manual for special education choices program being updated to include trauma-informed philosophy instructional model and support plans. Freeport Middle School is reviewing their parent-teacher conference structure to best meet the needs of families. So those are some of the things the work that's being done. That's the end of 2. Before I go on to 3, any other questions? Okay, strategic goal 3. All RSU5 school parent community partnerships are based on strong communication and active involvement to support student success. Objective 3.1, expand avenues to proactively distribute information about RSU5 schools and seek feedback from stakeholders. The strategy 3.1D, develop and implement a plan to improve parent and community communication, including feedback from all stakeholders. There was a target completion date of December, and the specific pieces there. The Strategic Communications Committee is currently revising the budget brochure to be more clear. The RSU5 website was launched, and the Bright Arrow notification for parents launched, which does include a translation component. That was the pieces that were going to be tackled. And again, that's a piece where we're going to continue. We're going to say, we communicate enough, clearly enough, where we will continue to do that.
I think Maura has a question on that one.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, did we decide to do any additional work on the community public comment process? And I know we talked about it in communication. Can't remember.
My recollection was that the Strategic Communication Committee was looking at that, but I could be wrong. I'm looking at strategic communication people, and they're giving me a very strange look. Yeah, that's your job now. Sorry. No, I think, I think that was, we talked about it, and if I'm being completely frank, it's probably because some of that stuff has settled down that it didn't rise to the top of priorities for strategic communications.
Was it policy that we?
I don't think it was policy, because we had the policy and we just reviewed it.
I remember the same thing as you. I just don't remember if it was strategic.
Well, I was just thinking about what we talked about it for the resolution, so I don't know if that's what people are thinking about, because we hadn't really talked about it otherwise, right? This year, anyway.
I feel like we were talking about it last year.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably maybe not today, but something we can discuss if we want to, if we want to elevate it to something we want to have worked on, or, and if so, who? So.
Okay, objective 3.2, engage all RSU5 learners in community-based learning, both in the classroom and out of the community. Strategy 3.2b, survey students and staff to identify additional school-based learning opportunities that would align with curriculum and spark student interest. The target date for that was 2023. That has not yet been started. And then research community-based learning opportunities that enhance the curriculum. Target completion date December 2024, and that has not yet been started. 3.3, encourage and support strong staff parent partnerships to enhance student success. Strategy 3.3b, explore research strategies for improving, expanding, and strengthening school parent partnerships. Progress indicators, it was targeted for December. At Durham, there are active participation events for families such as engineering night, coding night, math night, and reading night. They have guest speakers in a variety of topics, including academics, mental health, substance abuse, etc. They communicate to families from the school level weekly in their Tiger Tales, and incorporation of tips and ideas for supporting students at home in their family communication that comes from teachers. At the high school, there's exploration of options to bring back or replace Casco Bay Can parent table talk meetings that were hosted at the high school prior to the pandemic. Some topics that were included were about substance abuse prevention and support for parents, and exploration of options for family social events in addition to boosters and senior class events, for example, family dinner events. At the middle school, guest speakers on a variety of topics, weekly communication to parents from the school, and there's increased expectation for teachers to communicate with families more frequently with tips and ideas for supporting school students at home. They also have expanded communication with families to proactively prevent and responsibly address some increases in chronic absenteeism. At Mass Landing, they're resuming the Freeport Elementary PTC's annual speaker series. There's increased contact between the school council and parents in response to parent questions. And this is actually a reflection of higher calls and requests for this partnership. There are also weekly emails for families of students in Mighty Minds and executive functioning groups. At Moore Street School, they're resuming the Freeport PTC. We know there's a collaboration with Mass Landing, and there's also increased expectations for teachers to communicate with families more frequently. At Pownell, there's a pilot of a parent training to support students. It's called Partner Readers, and also a pilot of virtual parent small group talks with a school counselor with the topics about parenting. At Instructional Support, there's planned parent professional learning series in the winter and spring. Some of the topics will be federal and state mandates regarding parent rights in the education process and transition training for parents. And I'll stop there. That's the end of 3.3b. If there are any questions about that, some of the work being done. Okay. 3.3c, develop and recommend a plan of action to encourage more and stronger schools parent partnerships. Indicators, again, the target was December for completion. At Durham, there's a review of teacher communication with families and to create a uniform expectation across grade levels for frequencies and ways to support student learning. At the high school, there's a connection with Kyle Cares to create a plan for parent involvement in supporting student mental health. And there's expanded communication with parents about student offerings at the high school for both academic and social emotional programs and supports. For example, expanding communication about support offered for the college process, communication about workshops, offerings, guest speakers about tied to student mental health. At the middle school, there's a communication to families weekly. There's the increased expectation for teachers and expanded communications with families about, where you hear a lot about chronic absenteeism and how we're trying to address that. And then expanded communication about academic and social emotional programs. At Mass Landing, expanded communication about to increase chronic absenteeism. That's at Moore Street, increased expectation for teachers to communicate with families more frequently. At Pownell, there's the 2 pilots we mentioned earlier, and instructional support. They're the programs that they're going to be offering that all go under that Stronger School Parent Partnerships. That's the end of Goal 3.
What's the difference between B and C? So strategies to improve the partnerships,
So those are
and
the
a plan to encourage more partnerships.
And so they're going to use some of this information and develop it, and they will develop what exactly is our plan based on what's really working for partnerships. I think, for example, I'll use some of the, example from the middle school that they're using the feedback on what parents are really saying about the needs for parent-teacher conferences, and they're going to develop a plan of how they're going to do that action step for the future.
Thanks, Jean. So I have a request that is followed by a question. The request is that if it did not add a great deal of inconvenience going forward, if there was a way that when we get this update, if there was a way to flag items that had been that were connected to concerns that were raised by parents in the survey results that we get at the end of the prior year, so that then potentially I don't have to ask this question, which is how much have these particular, these progress indicators, how much are they linked or connected to things that we knew that parents were concerned about or looking for further work on?
And I know what I had asked our principals to do when they did their school reports earlier this year, each school, they mentioned that here was the feedback. And I know, for example, there's a good example about, the parent-teacher conference based on, there's some feedback they heard. And sometimes it's a survey or other. There may be other things that the school's hearing that they say, gee, we need to work on this. That would be included. So I'm not sure how easy it would be. And I think that's why we asked the schools to directly say, use that parent feedback when you're developing your school goals.
Yeah, totally understood. And again, this might not be the appropriate place for it. I think it's just that I'm racking my brain and was also going back through my notes and trying to identify that. And there's just a lot of content. So I was just sort of seeing if that made sense and in part of that review, it might be.
Yeah, but there's a way I can do that.
Awesome.
Going forward, I'll do that if it's possible.
Follow-up question to that. I'm seeing a lot here about communication, which I'm guessing was maybe some of that feedback from parents. When I think about stronger school parent partnerships, I think one indicator of that could be parent involvement. So I don't know if that has increased at all, if volunteerism has increased, or if substitute teachers have increased at all this year.
I'll tell you, substitutes not so much.
Right. I don't know. I know at the beginning of the year, I was wondering if there was an update on that actually, on the substitute pool. But on parent involvement, I don't know if that would be one.
And I think that's something we can look at in the future as an indicator as well for this report. And I think what's interesting, what's going to be difficult for us is that we didn't allow parents in during COVID at all. So what's, will be interesting is we couldn't compare it over the last couple of years, but just the number of folks that are in some ways participating, we could look at that.
And I think it's going to be really hard to tie things. I mean, other than in the administrator reports to us, it's going to be difficult to tie these things to things just in the past year, because communication is a great example of something that's been a increasing focus of ours for years, from feedback from a long time ago, from not just parent feedback, but the way we evaluate ourselves as a board and how we evaluate everyone who works here. It's been something we've flagged for a long time, and so that bubbled up when the strategic plan was first developed. So that's why you're continuing to see a focus on that. But I like hearing about it when we hear the principals report back to us. It helps me see how the ideas that we bat back and forth here, how it's playing out, where it counts.
On to number 4. This one will be brief. RSU5 has well-developed and refined finance, facilities, transportation, and food service systems to support the learning of all students. Objective 4.2, attract and retain highly effective staff. The action strategy, 4.2G, evaluate attrition rates and other relevant data. The completion date is May 2023. I will say that I'm completing exit interviews upon request. Everyone is invited to come in, but not everyone comes in. But certainly I'm doing that and looking at that data. And then we are collecting the data of why folks are certainly leaving us when we can have that information, because our goal is we want to keep the people we have for sure and attract new people. Any question on that one? It's in progress for sure. And again, that's another one we will say is done, but we want to continue to do that because we will be an ongoing one, but for the purpose of this plan will be done. Objective 4.3. Improve and assure student access to the highest quality nutrition program. 4.3D for the strategy, inventory and evaluate major equipment and facilities in all schools, prioritizing repairs and replacements, resulting in an annual maintenance schedule. Target date, particularly for nutrition, is 2023. And vendors are being consulted regarding their annual maintenance agreements. Resource management tracking procedures continue to be developed with IT and facilities. That's what Aaron's doing. 4.3E, they'll make recommendations. And again, that's not started. Anything on nutrition? That's specifically talking about nutrition. And the last one here, 4.6, ensure all facilities are operating efficiently and effectively. The strategy 4.6A, conduct an energy audit, i.e. lighting to identify needed improvements in RSU facilities, and that has not yet been started. That's the end of the interim progress report. And I don't know if I'm happy to answer any other questions that anyone has.
I thought the energy audit actually started last year.
It hasn't been started. We reached out. I don't know if Sean's still here. He's probably gone now. We had a conversation too. It has not been started.
Okay.
What happened, I believe, is that it was the vendor was reached out to, and they weren't sure if it was necessary or not, but it is necessary, so it will be completed.
Okay. Colin.
Just a quick process question. And forgive me if this is something that has been addressed in previous iterations of the board and everyone else knows this information. But how you mentioned before, Michelle, the question of how many May 2023 things are on here, and that only being 4 months away. I was just curious, how does the administration make a determination, sort of, I guess, at this point, on how to prioritize achieving those different, or working toward those different completion dates? Because I have no doubt that y'all are working incredibly hard on everything that it takes to run our schools and run them well. And I guess I'm just sort of curious how much there. At this point, there is kind of a reassessment of saying, like, you know what, we're not going to try to hit that, and we're just not. And how much it's more that we get to the end of the year and say, we tried, but we couldn't get there.
And the process actually starts in terms of those target dates and which part of the elephant we might bite off. Starts when we have our administrative team retreat, and we're really looking at all the goals and objectives of the board, and we say, we think we can do this much. And what you see is to date what's been completed, and certainly that will be a conversation at the team level as well, is like what realistically can we complete and complete well, or what might we start and then carry that over. And that's happening as I reviewed all the work that's been done by the district, that's happened, pretty regularly, that we've done this much, but the team has said, gee, we just need more time, we didn't touch this, or we're going to continue this. And I suspect with some of those that's going to happen. I'm really cognizant, certainly, of all of our administrative team there, because it really goes to them and their staff, just the workload for them.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So next, did you guys like that 20-minute presentation? Janice's so aggressive in how quickly we'll fly through this stuff. Or maybe just optimistic. Okay, so we will move on to 9B, District Scorecard. Cynthia.
So, good evening, and in your purple folders, you will find a few slides from the presentation that I tucked into the. What a night, huh?
Right.
So you'll also want the district scorecard, which is 9B. So you need those two in tandem. And I printed these out. You don't have every slide in here, just the ones with the graphics, so that you can look at it closer. We have those accommodations. So. Okay. So the purpose, oh, you have to go ahead. So we're working as a team, so because our first plan didn't work out, so she's going to be my assistant tonight and do my advancement of the slides. So, so another, see if I'm on the same. Okay. So the purpose of this annual presentation is really to take a look at our an academic look at our students, and to notice and celebrate the achievements in RSU5. Next slide. I keep clicking the slide thinking it's going to change. It's not. I will now take you through the actual scorecard. More, which is the one that says 9B. Can you hear me okay? All right. So I'm just going to take you through how it's organized. So if you go to page 2, it starts with the pre-K enrollment. I hope you've had a chance to take a quick look at this at least. And then we move on to the K-5, Fontes and Pinnell. So when you see slides later on, it'll be F&P. It's the BAS assessment. Followed by, on pages 3, followed by the achievement data in grades 3 through 11. This includes the MAP, which is NWEA, so those are two interchangeable. NWE is the vendor, if you remember from previous meetings. SAT data and AP or advanced placement data. Next, on pages 11 through 14, I'm going to go a little slow so you can look that. You'll see academic growth data. And then finally, you'll see graduation rates and post-secondary data on page 15. And as I go through the presentation, I will make references to the page numbers in the scorecard when appropriate so that you can see the data points. I also want to call your attention to 2 subgroups in the district scorecard. If you look at, for an example, right on page 4, you'll see the grade 3. You see under reading, there's a district total, and then there's 2 other subgroups. They're economically disadvantaged, and then the identified disability. And if in those slides, almost every single one of them have numbers in them, but if it's under 10, you won't see them because it's too identifiable. And we call that suppressing the data. Some of the data we'll talk about. We'll go into some more in depth, and then as we go through the presentation, I would ask, I have 2 specific breakpoints and then the ending point to ask questions. So I would ask that we can go through the academic achievement slides take a break, take a time for some questions, and then we'll proceed to the growth and then the graduation. So there'll be 3 segments where we can, I think it will move a little smoother that way. Let's see. And then I've asked all the principals to be here tonight, so when those breakpoints come up, some of the questions you may have may be specific to schools, some may not, but they're here to support the process. And then I just wanted to add the new Meridian Science. You'll not see that, or it's not in the scorecard, because even in a meeting I was in today, we are supposed to get the spring 22 data back soon. And I don't know how you want to define soon, but that's what we were told today in a meeting. Okay. So MAP stands for, I'm going to do a little education because a lot of you are newer to the board. So MAP stands for Measures of Academic Progress. That is actually the name of the assessment. And that's given to our students at every year. It's the vendor name, which stands for Northwest Evaluation Association. And then I also learned today in that meeting that it has been acquired as of December 22nd by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. So I don't know if the vendor name is going to change, so it might not be called NWEA anymore, or there's lots of unknowns coming. So that's just a little bit of trivia. So up here I have on the slide that RSU5 measures growth from spring to spring, beginning in FY18, which is a 2017-2018 school year, for all students in grades 2 through 10 in reading and math. You'll not see grade 11 on the scorecard. Beginning in FY21, which is the 2021 year, the state began using the MAP assessment as the state assessment in grades 3 through 8 and 11. But locally, we continue to administer it in the other years in grades 2, 9, and 10. For the upcoming testing, FY23 testing in May, the assessment has changed right in the middle of the year, in the middle of the process, just to complicate things more, and it will be called a through-year assessment. And I'm not going to get into the details of what that is tonight. That can be another conversation for another time, but it has changed. But we will still receive our RIT scores this year. So we still will be able to do our comparison. So that was one of the things that we had asked in several of our meetings, to make sure that we could still measure spring to spring. So what that really means is next year, we're starting over. We're going to have, we can't compare next year's to this year's. That's what that means essentially, which is unfortunate. And in addition, well, part of that new through year, one of the things they're changing from is this is a normed assessment. So what that means is it's nationally normed right now. They've created Maine standards. They're using Maine standards, kind of like we did with the former Empower MEA. So they will be based on Maine standards instead of these norm references. That's the change in essence. That's why you won't be able to compare, because these are normed. They do 3-year norming. This is a 3-year norming process with kids across the country in the same grade levels. So that's what you're comparing, or you've been comparing. Next year it will be different. It will be based on state standards like we did with the MEA. And then they're still looking at how they're going to determine student growth using that new through year. That's to be determined. Okay, I have to do the same thing that you're doing. Okay, so, oops, I have to do one more click here.
Or I do one more click.
Oh, yes, you do one more click, not me. This is confusing. Okay, so this chart shows the academic data in reading for cohorts of students on the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment that is administered in the spring, or was administered in the spring of 21 and 22 to the students in K through 5. So you would want to look at your scorecard as well as your slide. So the scorecard on pages 3 and 4. It starts with kindergarten. And I'll try to take you through what this means here. So students are expected to meet certain benchmark
a certain benchmark in reading at the end of each grade level. And if you look at the first column, either up on the wall, screen or on your chart, let's take the grade 1 columns. Okay, they're 2 columns together. The darker column shows us that 63.3% of the students in grade 1 last spring met the end of the year benchmark. When those students were in kindergarten, that's why they're together, they're the same cohort. So on the pinker side, when those students were in kindergarten, 62% of them met the kindergarten benchmark. And all cohorts made gains. If you look at the chart just in a graphic way, all cohorts made gains in achievement with the exception of last year's grade 2 cohort. So it looks pretty good. Here we go. Now I have to go to. At 8:30 today, this is complicated. Okay. The next 2 slides are in your folder. These are referencing pages 5 and 7 from the district scorecard. Here you see the academic achievement data in reading for the same cohort of students from the spring of 21 to the spring of 22. So this is our academic achievement. And just a note, all of these students are currently in the next grade level, just as a reminder. So when you're seeing the grade 4 column, those students are now in the next grade level for this year. So the data shows a dip in last year's grades 4, 8, and 10, and an increase in last year's grades 6, 7, and 9. But it's still super great looking. Okay. And this is math. So this slide shows the academic data in math for the same cohort of students from the spring of 21 and 22. This shows the students in grades 4, 7, and 9 made significant improvement, while all others maintained their achievement in math with just a slight drop in grade 10. Again, really nice achievement results. Okay. So this slide, we started, for those of you who haven't been on the board for a bit, we've done the scorecard every year, and we've modified or changed it a little bit over the years. And so last year we added this equity piece. And what we did was we looked, if you look at this chart, you'll see it says district total, and then the next column to the right of it is economically disadvantaged. And these are also on pages 5, 6, and 7. Of the achievement data points in reading, you will notice quite a discrepancy in achievement level for students who are economically disadvantaged. We have worked at removing these equitable barriers, such as devices and adding devices and just providing internet service to everybody. We did that over the last couple of years. And beginning last summer, we provided books through the mail for students to raise their raising to grades through 1 through 8 as one of our projects in our ESSER 3 grant. So we continue to look for additional ways to support and provide ways for kids to have equal access to this. Next slide. That's a fancy one. We see a similar picture in the math achievement, although not pronounced at the high school level. It seems to be more level at the high school level, but you see the differences there. Okay. And okay, this slide shows 8 years of data at the high school regarding the, I don't know why that's there. That's in the wrong place. So let's skip that one. Go to the next one. Yep. Somehow it got moved when maybe we were doing all of this. This is the one. Go one more. I don't know why they're not in the right order. Everything was perfect like less than 2 hours ago, I swear to you. Okay, so your next slide is in your slides that you have in your packets, the slides that I gave you. Colin, can you flip your page? Yes, that's the one that I want you to have right there, the one that's up on the screen. My slides are out of order. So this right here, shows you at school levels and the last 4-year trend. So it's a nice way to look across the grade levels and then follow cohorts in the same grade levels for students. Here's how the document works. So I'm going to take you through. The left side shows the reading achievement levels over the past 4 years, and the right side shows the math. This is color-coded so that you can follow cohorts of students. We'll start at the top. You see DCS, grade 3 in yellow. Everybody find that. And then this box shows that 64.4% of the students met their grade level expectations. Now let's follow that along the diagonal, and you can see in 2020, that was the year we didn't have that test because of COVID. In 21, you'll see 63%, and then in 22, that percentage has increased to 73.9%. So I just used that as one example to show you how you can follow the same color through. Now if you drop down to MLS and follow their path on the yellow, and then the same with Pownell. And then now I'd like to point out, look at grade 8, go back up to DCS at grade 8, and FMS in 21 in math. On the right side, okay, so actually go to the right. So find DCS and FMS in 21 in math. So go down to the 2021 column, which is the third column. And then if you go from, so both of the DCS and FMS cohorts combine here, and then you can see that the combined in grade 8, we had 136 students. See if you add up the number of students. So the first number is the number that were proficient, and the second number is the number of students. In 2022, we had 129. So I just wanted you to see that those colors follow through. So the two middle schools get combined together to follow through to the high school. Okay, now I'll go to the next slide. It should be the celebrations one, so go back. Yeah, I don't know why they're out of order. Okay, so celebrations. These are just generalized celebrations that we've just seen. Cohorts are overall maintaining their achievement levels in all grade levels in reading and math, with a noticeable dip in grade 10 reading and math noted in slides 6 and 7 that we went through. Oh, I guess I did want the AP class in there. So let's go back to AP.
Back one more.
Yep, go back to the AP, advanced placement. Do you have a advanced place? Oh yeah, you have that in your scorecard. So this would be on page 10. Thank you. Because this is also achievement level. I apologize. This slide shows it. Let's see. Let me get to my AP one. I'm not seeing it on here. This is really hard to do this way. Here we go. Okay, so this slide shows 8 years of data at the high school regarding advanced placement classes. AP classes provide great learning, and they strengthen transcripts and provide the ability to experience the rigor of these college classes. The highlight here is that 130 or more of our students were enrolled in AP classes over the last 4 years. So that would be that first row. You see 133, 130, 134, and 134. 81.3% of our students who took at least one exam passed at least one test, which is our highest yet. 11.9% higher than last year in 2021. This figure was 13.6% higher than the U.S. total in 21. The reason I'm giving you 21 is because we don't get the new figures for 2022 until April. Of all the tests taken in 2022, 74.9% had a score of 3 or better on a 5-point scale. A 3 is considered passing and is accepted for credit at many colleges. Okay. Now the celebrations. Thank you. You're so good at following me. Thank you. All right. So cohorts overall are maintaining their achievement levels at all grade levels in reading and math, with a noticeable dip in grade 10 reading and math noted in slides 6 and 7, which I read already. AP classes. For each of the last 4 years, we've maintained a high number of students enrolling in rigorous courses. We've noticed we have a noticeable increase of students scoring a 3 or higher on at least one exam, as well as an increase in the district total of exams receiving a score of 3 or higher. Economically disadvantaged students are not showing discrepancy as an overall subgroup in math, with the exception of grade 5. And then other noticings, economically disadvantaged students as a subgroup in reading show a significant discrepancy from the total population in grades 3 and 5. Okay. Now we're going to move to the MAP academic. It isn't. It's actually after this. I apologize. I know. I lied. I thought it was. For this slide, reference pages 11 through 13 in the district scorecard. Because it is growth over 1 year, you will just need to reference the last column. So go to page 11. So this chart shows the percentage of students who met their expected growth target last year in reading and in math. These students were assessed in the spring of 21 and then again in 22. Growth is based on where you start at the beginning of a given year and what your growth is expected to be at the end of the year based on the national norms. So it's different than achievement, because you may not be in that higher the achievement level. You may have started at a lower achievement level, but they still have an expected growth. And you could be in there and they still have an expected growth. Because MAP scores are based on norms, it's designed to be in the 50 or 60 percentile. Growth was lower than expected in grades 9 and 10. And for reading, falling below 50%. In math, we had stronger results in growth. Next slide. Yep. For equity growth data, this has a different look. When looking at equity related to students who are economically disadvantaged in terms of growth data, we see a different picture than we did on the academic achievement. In grades 9 and 10, a higher percentage of economically disadvantaged students met their growth target over a district total for their grade. As an example, on page 13 in the district scorecard, in grade 10, you'll see 9 out of 14 students, or 64.3% of economically disadvantaged students, made their growth target in reading, whereas 62 of the 140, or 44.3% of the district total, met their growth target. So it's nice to see that whilst wherever students start, where they're growing, that there's not a huge difference between those that are economically disadvantaged overall. And the next slide. Okay. So in math, for students who are economically disadvantaged, the math growth data shows a pretty nice picture. Okay, thank you. Celebrations and noticings around the growth data. The district growth scores in reading at the high school level were low, yet their achievement scores were quite high. District growth data across all grade levels was high in math. In equity in math, there's no significant difference in the growth results among students who are economically disadvantaged and their entire grade. And SAT, grade 11. The SAT is no longer used as a state assessment in grades in grade 11. If you want to look at the SAT data, it is, I think it's on page 9. Okay. And in 2021, all students, which is interesting because it stopped being required. So in 2021, all students took the SAT even though it wasn't required that year. Remember that they voted to remove it from the state assessment, the SAT. That's why we now use the MAP. And then in 2022, students got wind that they no longer need to take it. We do all provide for every student to take it. There's no cost to them. So in 2022, 78% of our students took the now optional SAT. Ta-da! First set of questions. And I don't know if, yeah.
I just wanted for everybody, including myself, but more for the new people, could you just explain how the economically disadvantaged is determined so people know?
Okay.
How we put
Yes.
students in that category?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because this is a whole other new discussion at the state and federal level. So for our grants, for the purposes of testing, we use free and reduced lunch numbers. So so I see a smile from Jill. So which was fine for a while, but if you've listened to Aaron Dow talk about trying to get people to apply, everyone now has free lunch. And so, but you're still trying to get them to apply because and Aaron does a great job with that because there's other benefits that they can derive from applying and all of that. So it's the best we have right now to identify. I think the messaging is there are probably other students that are economically disadvantaged. I'm sure there are that are not counted here because they're not identified. And we don't know who those are. Only 2 people in the district do because it's very confidential information. But our data person can pull reports because it's fed into a system, but nobody sees those except for the nutrition person. The other thing that's happening is they're looking at other ways to define economically disadvantaged across the state. Like when we do our title grant coming up, they're having conversations right now. I don't know where they're going to land, but it's a great point. And I'm glad you brought that up because we don't believe that everybody is counted in there, but it's the best that we have. And it's an equity lens that we want to look at. My throat's really dry. Any other? Do you want me to call on them? Okay. Kara?
Thank you so much for going through that. I found that really easy to follow based on how you laid that out.
Even though I was like a little disaster.
Despite the glitches, it was really helpful. Thank you. On the economically disadvantaged data for reading, it was great to see the growth data as well. I know you mentioned that you're looking for ways for the students to have more access or equal access to materials, and is that are there other reasons why their reading scores might be lower besides just having access, or do we believe that access to materials is really the reason?
I think that's just one way we can support. So I just gave you a few examples of how we can support, but I will call my trustee principals up. I think they're doing rock, paper, scissors right this moment to maybe respond to the question. Emily's coming up, I can tell.
And I guess along with that too, is this,
similar to other state data,
Could
other
you
school data. Yeah.
repeat it?
My question is, aside from offering more materials, are there some other strategies to help increase those scores? I'm guessing there's data. And
There's
evidence out
there's
there.
RTI. There's like, but I'll let you go ahead. My mouth is dry.
So there are a handful of factors we consider. I think one is if we were looking at incoming pre-K and K data, there's a discrepancy from the moment kids are entering that is connected to other factors, access to preschool, et cetera. And so some of this is early intervention work, which there's an additional layer, and the lower elementary principals are probably better able to speak to what that looks like in terms of identifying kids early on so we can provide intervention. And so one area that we consider is RTI and ensuring that kids who might need more targeted instruction have access to it. And special ed, there's overlap between some of these students and students receiving special education services as well. And then also not just access to materials, but also the conditions in which kids can access those, right? And so kids who have the ability, and I would say, like, my perspective is in general, kids are reading less outside the school day than they had historically. I think COVID impacted how kids use their out of school time and how families use their out of school time, which is like a bigger conversation about reading data in general. So, one piece is ensuring kids have access to books, but we know that that's not sufficient, right? And we also have robust school libraries where kids have open access to books independent of if they have overdue books or fines, and ensuring kids have classroom libraries where they have access to books, but it's more complex than an issue of access to resources.
Anybody else want to add? No? Okay. No takers. Okay.
Does that suffice?
Yes, I do have two other questions, though. The grade 2 data, I think one of the first things I have to ask about that. That seems to really stand out to me.
Could you show us
this is one.
Is it the academic
the
achievement?
first slide in the presentation, and the reading, academic achievement reading. I'm just wondering what theories there might be behind that number and the difference between grade 2 and grade 3 there.
Here comes Julie. So this is just a theory of wondering, but that grade level were the grade level probably most impacted through the school closures through COVID. They lost their spring kindergarten year, which is the time of kindergarten where they're actually reading in books and have that sustained practice. And they were taught on a computer screen by people who weren't used to doing that. And then they had their hybrid first grade experience. So they were in school part-time. We prioritized kind of what we considered to be the most important things for them to learn that year. And I think when you think about a reader that develops over the K2 span in second grade, is where, we're only expecting second graders to grow 3 levels, whereas in first it's more like 10. So you can understand that that's a grade level where the depth really happens. They're reading long, strong, and much more complex books. And I think that grade level 2 missed out on a lot of the extended practice around talking about books. They were 3 feet away. They were in masks, just that rich, deep experience around literature in general was compromised, really. And then I think I can't speak to, I don't know what it looked like in the third grade, because your question was about third grade too. Was there a specific question about third?
Mostly the second. It just seems like such a difference between grade 2 and grade 3.
Yeah, the lower, because they dipped in second, so the same kind of impact was that third grade we were sending on with low data, and then thankfully they've been able to rebound some in third grade as they've moved on. But the grades following, it seems that the kindergarten grade that had the hybrid experience, their data was stronger than it's been in a while. So there's kind of some interesting things at play that hopefully that will just carry them through now.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
My other question is a very quick one, just a historical question about the AP.
Oh, yes.
There was a big jump between, was it 18 and 19?
Let me get to the slide.
And what was?
Yeah, go backward, AP, so I can see it.
So like what did they add classes?
Right, like what's
There
the
you go.
explanation for the increase in number of students between the 17-18 year and the 18-19 year?
Oh, okay.
What
So I
happened
don't
that
know
year?
if Jen wants to take it, but I think we don't have now, and I don't know if we did, but we don't. If they want to take it, they can. We encourage that, and I don't know. Do you remember like why they
Yeah,
jumped?
between 16 and 17 actually, and 18 and 19. It
It
looks like
so
it nearly
low, and
doubled.
then What did you or we do to?
In the number of students enrolled. So one of those things is that we increased the actual classes that we offer. So we didn't offer AP US History. Tegan calls it A Push. That's what that is. And so that is a very popular class. And then there's some years where most schools offer Calculus AB, and we offer Calculus AB and BC. BC is the next level that's higher than that. Some years it fluctuates. We have like a cohort of kids that are ready for BC, and then some years, like this year, it's a larger group. Next year, it will be a smaller group. It kind of fluctuates like that.
While you're there, do you offer AP Computer Science?
We don't, but we're exploring that. We have a teacher who is working on developing that curriculum, and she has taken over the computer programming class this year, and she's looking at potentially offering AP for next year.
Okay, excellent. And then do you know for the PSAT in 21 how many semifinalists you had? Do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head. It varies. Some years we have none, and
I
then
remember we had a finalist last year.
yeah, so we range between 1 and 4 students a year typically.
Okay.
Semifinalists, yeah. So it's the score that they get on their PSAT, and then they're put into a category of how high they scored, and then from there, it's kind of a unique College Board thing, which I can't explain. But it's like 90% of semifinalists become a finalist, which is interesting. It's like everybody gets a trophy, and then they select from the finalist pool. So, and those are tied to merit scholarships.
I don't know if you want Jen or not, but we'll ask Kelly. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted someone to explain to me the differences between the two assessments for the reading cohorts, the BAF and PBAS.
Oh,
versus
they're
the-
totally different assessments.
and why the scores are so different? The percentage of students meeting those benchmarks.
You cannot even compare them. They're different administrations. They're assessing differently. The BAS, and I'll ask anybody who wants to jump up, but the BAS, they're reading, there's decoding, there's a fluency, there's comprehension. It's 1-to-1. And when they're older, it's here. Emily, she's like, oh no, I want to take this.
So start with NWA. So NWA is standardized, it's nationally normed, and it's adaptive. So a student takes it on a computer, it adjusts to their level, and it's true because it's standardized. In some ways, you're getting like a more accurate picture. The BAS, a student's reading a passage, and then we're looking at things like their accuracy in reading words, their fluency, and then their comprehension about the text. And at the upper grade spans, they're doing more inferential comprehension, meatier thinking work than is required on the NWA. So I generally think like the BAS, the bar to clear proficiency on the BAS is higher than it is on the NWA, hence the difference.
That is a great question. Hi, Mar.
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you so much for all this information and the comparisons and everything. It's great. I wanted to check because I thought maybe I misheard you on the equity slides and academic achievement. I think you had the noticing of grades 3 and 5 on reading being significantly lower. And then on math, I thought that you said grade 10, but maybe I misremembered.
On this slide?
Yeah. So you had drawn attention to certain grades that were where you were noticing significant differences in economically disadvantaged students.
So economically math. Well, this is the correct data. So this is So, math.
Okay. So I was just wondering which ones we would, I mean, I guess
Yeah.
obviously 5th grade, I think I circled and.
Yeah. So the economically, this is so hard to do it this way. Okay, economically. Okay. So on this one, I didn't say that. I said we see a similar picture in math, although not pronounced at the high level. And then when I go to reading, yeah, I didn't on these two slides. I didn't specify.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in my notes. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Are we ready to go on? Or any more questions? Oh, Kelly?
Yeah, since we're on this particular slide about the economically disadvantaged achievement in reading.
Reading.
Do you have a theory about what's going on in grade 10? It seems like we were doing so well in grade 9, and then something happened in grade 10.
Got a theory? I almost wonder, are the number of students, let's see, the number of students who took that. So let me go. Because that could make a difference. Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to look at this anyway.
So there's a couple of different theories. One thing is that we've been talking for a few years about test fatigue with this class. The 10th graders sometimes tend to be the ones who push back the most on taking the NWA because they've been taking it since the 3rd grade. We have a higher I'm not exactly sure what the numbers are. We have a higher opt-out and participation rate for the 10th graders than we do. It's significantly higher than the 9th grade. We have a good participation rate. But it also, part of that is that's a grade that was impacted by multiple years of COVID. And so it's hard to determine what exactly is the factor that impacted those scores the most. But it's certainly something that we consider when we're working with our 10th graders and knowing that we want those scores to be higher than that.
Jill.
Just a question, because you look at the count for the social economic. Do you find that grouping, you're looking at students if you have the data for the free and reduced lunch, but do you have any data on from year to year to year? Does that we see that number like a 20 or a 10? But are those kids, how consistent are our social economic disadvantaged students? Like, do we have a lot of moving, like kids come in, kids leave, or is that those kids pretty much stay here? Because I find sometimes that I wonder if, you're struggling, you're maybe a family that might be moving into the district or moving out of the district, or you might be homeless, and you're staying with a friend here. And so it would be interesting to see when you have data like from year to year, when you're looking at that diagonal piece, if you break it out with your socially disadvantaged, if those kids are consistent, or are we looking at different kids? Because I remember at one point last year, the numbers were so small, and you could kind of you couldn't count them, you didn't show them, and then the next year you could, and you had a couple years in a row. And I just wonder if maybe we're not always looking at the same kids. Like, we shouldn't assume that.
Right.
And so the number's small. So statistically, I would think that would look, it will look different from year to year. And like, oh, what are we doing? And maybe it's just the simple fact that it was a different kid taking the test.
That is true every year, right? Like there's like, if you look at identified disabilities, you could have, I don't know what is June gone? I don't know if you looked at the attrition rate, like in and outs. Do you have like a sense of that?
for Jen.
And if you don't, that's okay. But
Yeah.
I just thought that would be an interesting data
Mhm.
point to know when you see it going
Well,
back and forth.
Yeah, and one of the problems is there's only one person in the district that has that information is allowed to. So that would even be identifiable. Yeah, yeah. Colin.
Yeah, this is super helpful. My question is, it goes a bit to what Jill was speaking about. As I was reviewing some of this for the meeting today, I was trying to find a lens to make sense of some of the what seemed to be pretty wild variations in certain particularly among the identified disability groups. That I couldn't figure out a way to look at the data and make any sense of any patterns or any ways in which we would be able to respond based on the lack of patterns. So I guess I'm just sort of curious, and I think that's also true within the economically disadvantaged group as well. I think it goes to what Jill's saying, is sort of the question of, is it the same? Are we talking about the same students? Are we talking about shifting populations? And I guess just from a board perspective, how are we supposed to look at that, or how can, and I'm asking that not adversarially. I'm asking how to think about that, because then the question becomes, well, what is the support needed? And I think because it comes down to budget requirements or curricular or teaching method changes or staffing. So I think do you have a recommendation for how to look at some of those wilder numbers?
Yes. So each of the buildings, each school has their own scorecard. So they have their data just like this by their students only. And so they look that over with their leadership teams. They set their goals on that, and then their budget requests, if there's a need, will come to you for that. So we use the 30,000 foot here, but I can tell you that they're looking and even though the free and reduced or the special ed students are not identified here, they know who the kids are, and they're putting in the supports that are needed at the building level. So I could, rest assured that it's not just this level that we look at. They're looking at, they all have their own scorecard, and I have them, but we don't do that at this level. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, I guess you're saying there's a link between this 30,000 foot view and then what we're going to see at the budget in the budget presentation. So, for example, in grade 9 of academic growth, if we have the one of 10 students in the reading category for grade 9 with identified disability meeting that growth rate, you're suggesting it's not so much that we should be looking for a pattern within the district. It's more to say that's something that particular school will be looking at to try to identify what is happening there in terms of meeting those particular students' needs going into the next year.
And they also have their little secret meetings, as they call it. And so they can look at if there's, three schools that are looking at grade 2 data. Now, I'm not saying they did this, but I'm giving you an example. And 2 schools have really got some scores that are higher, and then one school doesn't. They would have conversations about, like, what's your structure? What do you do? I mean, they do a lot of collaborating together, so there's a value in them looking at it, across. It's just like if you have 2 teachers in the same grade level and, or 3 and 2 their scores are higher and another one, and then you talk about, how can we support, what's going on, let's take a deeper dive. Kelly?
Yeah, and just for us so that we understand these numbers, how is a student identified as having a disability for the purposes of this chart?
So they would have an IEP. Okay. So they're officially identified with an IEP. Yep. Okay. Oh, I gotta get back to that. You gonna race me? Equity growth data. questions? Okay, so graduation cohort, is that what we're on? Yeah. Okay. So the next, bye Tegan, good luck on your midterms. The next 3 slides can be referenced on page 15 of the district scorecard. The high school graduation rate examines the percentage of public high school students who graduate on time. It only starts at 9th grade. They don't look any further back. And these students who start in 9th grade are expected to graduate in 4 years. And this is our latest number is 97.5%. And we were at 97.9% last year. So we've stayed really consistent those last 3 years. I can tell you that the state of Maine graduation rate for 2022 is 86.07. So we are over 10% above that, or 11% above that. Just if you want more information, the year before for the state of Maine was 86.1. And then for 2020, it was 87.5. So you can see we've been consistently at least 10% above. Our boost committee also looks very closely at this. This is like our biggest goal, is to get to 100%, right? That's always our goal. There are lots of hands on deck that really look at students on a regular basis and getting them those supports, whether it's extra tutoring, a mentor, there's a variety of things, extra social work, whatever it is, for those students that need extra support. So we're hoping to get to we're very, very close. And just for information, we still keep track of our cohort of students. So oftentimes they do 4-year, 5-year, and 6-year data, but it doesn't count for the graduation rate. It does, but this is the one that we should officially go by. Oftentimes, if I look a year later and I look at the 5th year, it's gone up to like 98.9%. So it's added one more graduate. So we oftentimes see that. 6th year, not so much, but usually in the 5th year. Sometimes we've had another student in the 6th year. So they still have an opportunity to do that. Next slide. Okay, the next 2 slides reflect the data about students enrolled in college immediately after high school. In the class of 21, 65.7% of our graduating class went on to secondary education in either a 2 or a 4-year program. We don't receive our 2022 cohort data on this one until April. So it's about 10 months out that we get that data. And next slide. And then the latest class that we have data on for the 2nd year students enrolled in post-secondary is for the class of 2019. So would you go back a slide? So can you see up there the class of 2019 has 69, does it say 0.1%? And then go back forward. And so if you look at that column right there, yeah, very good. She's got a cursor right there. So 61.9% of that total class is still in, it went to their 2nd year. They don't collect data beyond that. For those of you who don't know that, they don't collect data beyond that 2nd year. But that's nice that we still have that many students enrolled in the program. So they persist. We call that persistence. And the next slide. So this is just a visual for any of those visual learners. Remember that graduates are counted as attending for all 4 years. So if you start with that 2019 class that I just pointed out to you, each one of those little book icons that are stacked represents the 10 kids, or the total class, right? So it's by tens. And so then if you look at the graduation rate in June of 2019, it's showing, this is supposed to be showing you 93.2%, because I have that other little book there that's kind of covering it up. Those are the ones that didn't graduate. And then entering college in 2019 was that 69% that we saw on the other earlier slide. And then that second slide, or the last row, shows those return to college for year 2. So it's a nice visual to see that way. You can go to the next slide. And this slide I added last year. I hadn't done this before. The data that is collected with the guidance department is like what happens after graduation. So it's not, this is taking into consideration all the graduates. What are they doing after high school? So we saw how many went to school like in that 2019. So on the left, you see 2021. We had, you see 65.7% enrolled in either a 2 or a 4-year program. So I'm adding those together. And then the rest of the data on the pie chart, which includes military, employment, and a gap year, is self-reported data, which is collected from the guidance office. The official data for the 2022 graduates won't be available until April of 22, like I told you before. So if you look at the right, but these are all self-reported on the right. So on the left, the green and the green are the actual numbers that went to a 2 or 4-year program. Last year when I reported the 2021, that looked a little different because there were a few more that reported that they were going, but then I changed it so that it would be the accurate on the left. So on the right, you can see far more are reporting that they're going to a 2 or 4-year program. No one is going to go into the military as of yet, which is interesting. And then you have that chart also in your packet that I gave to you. And then celebrations. Okay. I can just read it from your slide. I can just read it. They don't need to. Oops, they won't need to see it. Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay. So our graduation rate has remained high and consistent over the last 3 years, ranging from 97 to 97.9. And then in 2002, we are 11.5% above the state average. So that's a lot to celebrate and be grateful for. And then you can go to the last slide because it's very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yay. I wanted to change up the question slides. Yeah. Should I keep calling Maddie? Okay.
I'm really grateful that we're capturing more information about the diversity of post-high school experiences. I think that's great. So thanks for that. And just a request probably aimed toward Jen, just around the culture of celebrating a diversity of experiences. I think there's more happening around that in the culture at the high school. And I hope so. I'd love to see more of it. I know, for example, there's every class does an Instagram page that celebrates when kids get into college. I'd love to see them include kids who are going on to jobs and going on to other things too. Just a more inclusive experience, I think, would be great. You see some other schools do that. You know, they have, they do like sign-on days for athletes who are going into sports, but sometimes they'll do a big photo op for somebody who's going to work with a plumbing company or, something like that. I'd love to see more of that.
Nice. That's a great idea.
Jed's behind you.
I think that's a great idea. I just want to share those Instagram pages are not monitored by the school. The kids create those.
I'm hoping someone might listen and pass it on.
Yeah, I know. Tegan just left.
I'm amazed that adults listen to our board meetings, never mind students.
But we do not have, so we share any acceptances to any programs through our daily announcements, but we don't do it on social media.
Any other questions, comments? The one question I had around the graduation rate is, we have an identified cohort that we use for a variety of things. Do we know how we how?
I would be happy to get that information for
Be
you.
curious.
I don't have it, but I can get it easily.
Yeah, so like
Yeah.
the data warehouse, I assume you could look at different districts. It's not just you and then the rest of the state,
Yeah,
right?
we can easily get that information.
Thanks.
I can have, I'll get it and maybe Jean, you can
Yeah.
share it.
Happy to do that.
Thanks. Thank you, Cynthia. I know that is always a ton of work. And as Kara said, it was very understandable. I thought it was just because I'd heard it 10 times, but even this time, even for new people, it was really. But no, I definitely think, this thing has sort of morphed through the years, and every year I think it gets a little more clear around what we're trying to identify. And Colin, thank you for that question of like, how do we use, this is a lot of data, like how do we use this to inform our decisions? I think really it's informational at this point until they bring things to us and go, you remember that slide? And this is what we're doing about it. Because we definitely will hear those types of requests. Okay. All right. We finally got through 9. Look at that. All right. So we will move on to 10. No, we won't. There are none. No policy. So we are going to move into 14, personnel. So I'm just going to put the motion on the table and then Jean will take over. Do I have a motion for consideration and approval to employ a first grade teacher at the Durham Community School for the 22-23 school year? Kara and Maura, thank you.
Okay. So this evening, I bring to you candidate Julia Grotchel to be employed as a first grade teacher at Durham. Julia has a Bachelor of Science in Finance for the University of Maine at Orono and a Master's of Science Teaching and Learning from USM, which will be the spring of this year. And speaking with Julia, it's going to be within the next couple of months, she will have that completed. Her experience highlights include she's been a Math RTI long-term sub at Durham, Math RTI Ed Tech at Durham, and she was a summer learning teacher at Durham in 2021. She's currently in Ed Tech 3 at Durham Community School at this time. Her certifications include K-8 General Elementary and 7-12 Math. Julie is positive, compassionate, and reflective of her practice. She's ready to have a classroom of her own. Her references are excellent, and she'll be a tremendous asset to DCS.
Questions? All right. We have a motion. We have a second. So all those in favor? Great. None opposed. All right. So do I have a motion for consideration and approval to employ a social studies teacher at the Durham Community School for the 22-23 school year, 1 year only? I'm looking left because I always look right. Colin and Kelly. Thank you.
And I bring to you this evening William Thompson. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Government from Colby College and a Master's of Art in Political Science from George Mason University. His experience highlights his professional experience includes various roles in the state and national government. He holds a 7-12 Social Studies certification. William is described as honest, respectful, adaptable, and patient. He's ready to bring the depth of his professional experience and his passion for social studies to the classroom. William will be an asset to the teaching team at DCS.
Maddie.
This is marked as a 1-year position only?
This one is, and what Mr. Pidden did is really look at, for each position, the depth of the pool of candidates that we have, and it's in during, especially at this time of month, sometimes you get a deeper pool than others. So that's why it's a 1 year only, and it will be advertised for a full-time position going forward.
Jen?
Did you say he holds a certificate?
He is certified, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All those in favor? Not opposed. Thank you. All right. So back to public comments. Moving on. Do I have a motion for consideration and approval to enter into executive session as outlined in 1 MRSA Section 4056A for the purpose of discussing the superintendent's evaluation performance goals? Jen, Colin, thank you. I just have you conditions and not even raise your hand anymore. That's what I'm trying to change. I want you guys to be surprised at which way I look. All those in favor? Great. We'll take a quick break while they break down the equipment and reconvene.